So you know the moment where like you're studying, things are finally start to click and you're like, "Oh my God, my efforts, they're paying off. Things are happening." You're not overthinking it. And then suddenly your brain just goes, "All right, time to get serious." And you're like, "But I thought I was serious. Thought I was actually doing it. What do you mean?" That used to be me a lot, and I still catch myself doing it, but I recognize when it's happening because like the second I started to feel proud about my progress, I would decide, or my brain would decide, you know what, but you know that's not enough, right? And I kind of talk about this a little bit in my Redefining Fluency series, but also in my Perfectionism series, which if you haven't watched either of those on my channel, make sure to watch that. So I'd start to doubt my goals, which means I would double them and say, well, that's not good enough. So you got to do twice as much. You said you were going to read a chapter a week. Well, now it's 2 chapters a week in order to prove to yourself that the efforts are worth it. And one of the things that I know that I would do in these moments is I'd start tracking everything that I'm doing. I mean, it wouldn't last long. It would be like a week. That's when I'm like, okay, what kind of app do I need? I need a to-do list. I need Notion. I need like create a whole system, color coding, getting all my markers and highlighters out. But like that, who's to say that that's actually helping? Like, is that helping, or is that just the manic talking? Is that just the insecurity, the guilt, the frustration, the overwhelm talking, whatever it might have been in that moment for me? And then I convince the kicker though is that I would do all of these things and I'd convince myself that I'm just being more disciplined. I am actually taking things seriously now. 1 hour wasn't enough. So now I'm doing 2 hours. And that means real progress is going to happen. That means that I'm really taking this seriously. No, it just means I'm binge studying. That's it. It wasn't discipline. It was fear. It was guilt. It was overwhelm. It was frustration from lack of progress. It was anything but discipline. It might have felt like it, but it wasn't a level that I could handle. It wasn't aligned to me. It was pushing myself beyond the level that I should, which means I'm instantly shoving myself right back into burnout because I'm not being responsive to me, to like what I need, to my energy levels, the time that I have available, all those things. I'm not listening to any of it. I'm just doing what I feel is the right thing to do. And it's actually the wrong thing to do. And it's going to continue the cycle that I'm trying to get out of in the first place. So I used to think that in order to make progress, I had to double up my efforts. I had to work harder. I had to do more. I have to study more. I have to take more classes. I have to add more flashcards. 10 flashcards, not enough. Make it 20, make it 30. So, like, if I could do 15 minutes a day, obviously I should be doing 30 minutes or more. And this, by the way, is exactly the opposite of what I help people with and what I teach them about setting expectations for your language studies. But it was and still is in some way a belief that I carry because the perfectionism is strong, the high achieving expectations are strong, but the time and energy is low. The spoons are not all here. And the problem is that logic was coming from panic. Like I set goals for my language studies. My goals have always been like 5 by 25 and 10 by 30. I've said that since I was like 12, that I'm going to learn 5 languages by 25 and 10 languages by 30. And so the pressure looming over me, like you have to learn a new language every year at some point when I started to take it seriously, was around 18. And so I was like, you're on a time limit. You got to do this fast. And this also happens, I think, because our brains don't really trust progress unless it hurts. Like it doesn't trust progress unless it's painful, unless it's boring. It's like you're not really studying unless it's boring. You're not really making progress unless you dread the session, when no, you actually shouldn't. And for many of us who that kind of pressure never works, does not work, I feel everyone should, but especially those of us who have found that a challenge, we have to have fun in some way. Even if we start off with the boring stuff and end with the fun, not as a reward, because if you heard me say this before, rewards don't work for me because if I want the reward, if I want the thing, I'm just going to get the thing. Like, who's stopping me? Me? No, I'm not. So instead of it being a reward, it's more like I I'm letting myself do that thing, but before I can get to it, I have to do the boring stuff. Like, that's okay. Not everything's going to be 100% fun. Sometimes you'll just hate conjugation and you have to do it. There are fun ways to do it. There are more exciting ways to learn and practice it. But it's still something that we have to do. There are just ways to make it easier on you, on your brain, on your time and your energy, all those different things. So, like, for example, when I was back in college, Japanese for 3 years. I was also juggling Spanish and Korean and Mandarin. I'd only taken a year of Mandarin Chinese. I knew my tones sucked because we didn't really prioritize them or practice them. My teacher was just trying to get us to say things, and she knew what we were saying based off of what she taught us. And I didn't really realize or learn until after that class how important tones were. I knew they were important, but I didn't realize how important they were until I started making mistakes that were really embarrassing. And so I'm juggling Spanish, Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, Chinese. And what did I decide to do as an overachiever? I said, hey, how about you learn French? You have a friend who's taking French classes. She's been taking it for a few years. Ask her to teach you French. And so I did. And then I started French. And I had 5 languages that I was juggling for the first time. And this is not even including the like on and off American Sign Language that I learned here and there. Not enough to really do anything with it, but enough to like spell your name and say a couple sentences and ask a few questions. And so at this point, within a few weeks, it's not that I wasn't studying at all, but I was getting overwhelmed on how to juggle it. And then I had my color coded schedules. I was like, first I said, every day is going to be a different language. And I quickly realized after 2 weeks, well, if Spanish is on Monday and it's only on Monday, that means you're studying Spanish once a week. Can you do that? Can you handle that? Are you going to make progress with that? Probably not. Not as quickly as I would like to. So then I had to adjust and I would say, okay, this day's a reading day and this day's a writing day. And then I got overwhelmed with all of the speaking practice I had in one day crammed together and all of the writing that I had crammed together. And again, I love reading and I love writing, but for some reason, all of that in another language, it was just too much. It was too much. So when I tell, like, so when I'm in a coaching call, when I'm in a coaching conversation and I'm literally sharing with people, like, here are some different ways to organize your week, your schedule, your plans. I'm saying this from absolute experience. When I say I've tried nearly all the things, I've tried nearly all the things. Now, could I say from experience what it's like to force yourself to move to another country to learn the language? No, never did that. I would never do that. I like to be prepared. I'm not somebody who likes to, that feels very unsafe. I will not subscribe to that one. But ultimately, what I realized through that entire experience is that I was making consistency mean every single day. And that was probably the first moments when I had to redefine what consistency means to me in the same ways that I say to redefine what fluency means. And once I realized that consistency doesn't mean every day, despite what many of us tend to think, what many people still say, the reality is even like consistent exercise, maybe it could mean walking every day, but it doesn't mean strength training every day because that would destroy your body. Like you have to give your body days of rest. And in that same way, you're training this muscle of learning languages. You have to give your body moments of rest. And you also have to honor the time that you have. Like, you're not going to get a trainer who says you have to exercise for 3 hours every day if you only have an hour to spare and you don't have any short-term goals of reaching some sort of optimal body type, muscle percentage at a certain date. Right? It's adapted to you and your needs. The plan, the schedule, the routine that you create for your language study should also be that. And that was also around the time when I decided or realized that those were 3 different things. Or at least it helped me to understand what was going wrong, what I could possibly fix once I defined that those are 3 different things. The plan is the what and the why. The schedule is the when and the where. And the routine is the how. And it puts all those other things together. That helped me to go, okay, it's not my schedule that's the issue. It's my plan. I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know why I'm doing it. Or it's actually my schedule because I don't know when this is happening and where. I need to figure out what I need, more rigid or more flexible structure. Or I might say, actually, it's the how. I have all of those other pieces, but I don't actually know how this is happening. Like what exactly am I going to do? What's the routine I'm going to follow in order to make this happen? This helps me to narrow down what's not working so I can make it work better for me in the long run. I don't want to use the words like that was a game changer, but it really was. It really was. You know, it was what helps me to realize that, again, consistency wasn't every day, but also that consistency needs to be protected. That consistency needs to be honored in the way that works for me, not one form of consistency that's for everybody. Right? Because every time I tried to make my study progress process look impressive for someone else, it It was partially for me, but it was also so that other people would look at it and go, wow, you're so amazing. Look at you studying multiple languages, whether I realize it or not. And like every time I was trying to make it look impressive, I was actually making my entire routine and habit more fragile because I was making it harder to maintain. And if it's hard to maintain, you're not going to do it. So when I say perfectionism is sneaking back in, and if you want to deep dive into perfectionism, I actually have a more teaching style video series on my channel about that, like how to overcome perfectionism in your language studies. But I mean that when I say it's sneaking back in, I mean that the perfectionism wasn't, it wasn't holding a sign saying, hey, I'm perfectionism and I'm back. It wasn't like knocking on the door and greeting me kindly to let it inside. It snuck through the window, it kind of slid where I least expected it to be in ways that I did not identify was perfectionism. But, in hindsight, looking back on it, it absolutely was. Because instead of it looking like perfectionism, it just looked like, oh, well, I'm being responsible now. I'm being studious now. I'm taking my studies seriously. I'm developing my discipline, right? I'm just trying to be consistent. But you haven't defined what consistency means to you and what that looks like for you. Maybe, it slips back in because it's hidden in the words. I'm just trying to make the most of my time. But again, underneath that structure is fear. Fear of losing what you've worked for, fear of not making the progress that you thought you'd make, fear of not being good enough, not being good enough to learn languages or good enough in general, fear of forgetting everything that you've learned. So you need to cram in more and study more to keep it. And then the fear turns your entire language learning process, routine, journey into this like survival mode activity where you're not enjoying any part of it. You're just trying to get to the end goal. You're like, I hate everything about this, but I won't hate it when I get to point Z. But you're making it harder to get to point Z. I will speak for myself. I made it harder to get there because I was putting myself in a position to hate every moment of studying. I turned something that I loved into something that I hated. And I stopped exploring and creating and having fun and like loving the experience. And I started to dread it. I was like, oh, you got to study again. Oh, well, I'll do it tomorrow. That's when you start doing that, productive procrastination and putting things off to the next day. And the next day becomes the next week. And the next week becomes the next month. And the next month becomes the next year. And then 5 years later, you're like, I have not touched that language. It happens. Like it got to the point where I would even rewrite my notes, not for studying, because if I'm being entirely honest, while I know how to study to learn languages, the act of studying in general, I never learned. Like I have strategies now because of language learning, but I still am like, I would have to apply what I know from language learning to other subjects, but I know I was never taught how to study. And I don't think many of us were. And so I would literally rewrite notes partially out of the studying desire, but also because I was like, the notes are messy. I can't be a good language learner if my notes are messy. I would rip out entire pages and rewrite them in prettier colors and, organize it better and neater handwriting and taking my time. And I would never get past that because I'm rewriting the notes 6 times. And it was me avoiding the idea of not being perfect, me avoiding the idea of, I don't know, the possibility of not understanding, the possibility of being confused. And so this is why for myself, I say I'm still a perfectionist. I don't call myself a recovering perfectionist. And it's not something that I strive for because I'm not trying to recover. I don't necessarily see perfectionism as a bad thing. I just see that it has taken over every aspect of my life. And I had to learn how to not do that. Now I'm really good at not letting perfectionism take over my entire life, and I use it strategically. And that's kind of one of the things that I talk about in depth in my perfectionist workshop. The Introvert's Guide to How to Learn Languages as a Perfectionist is literally what I called it, because I know that there's a lot of people out there that are introvert or perfectionist or both like me and are like, how in the hell am I going to do this? It's not working. Every strategy is made for extroverts or is making me strive for 100%. And when I don't get that, I quit for 3 weeks. So me sharing what I do in hopes that it helps other people. And it has, right? I've done the testing so that you don't have to do all the crazy testing and you have a more strategic way of approaching your own studies, right? And so what I learned is that perfectionism, it doesn't really go away. It can, find new ways to make you overthink your wins, overthink your mistakes, make those mistakes seem a lot worse than they actually are. But you can train yourself out of that. You can teach yourself that that's not reality and learn to recognize it more when it's happening so that it doesn't impact you in the same way and that you can easily avoid and swerve around that. And so when I finally saw that pattern in my own language studies, I decided to start testing more things out and gathering data. So if you've ever heard me say that before, everything about our language studies, and from my perspective, should be framed from a gathering data. What is working, what's not working? Do more of the things that work in our language studies and less of the things that don't. So I just wanted to know what would happen if I stopped chasing that perfection? Like, what would be the next step? Actually, I would set my expectation and then go, okay, what's less than that? All right, what's less than that? And what's less than that? And that's actually how I backtracked to set 3 levels of expectations, because I would set what I thought was an average expectation, but was still the highest expectation. And then I had to go like 3 or 4 levels down from that to set the real bare minimum expectation. Now it's really easy for me to set the bare minimum most of the time, so I had to, the same way that I talk about mistakes and I say like, make mistakes on purpose. In this case, I would study less on purpose. I would say, okay, typical me would say, read the whole chapter. I'm just going to read a sentence and just see how that feels, see how that works. Sometimes I'd read the sentence and I'd actually feel the energy, the motivation to continue reading a little bit, but I would purposely stop myself after like a paragraph. I say, you can't read any more than that. Or if I had a specific time limit that I wanted to study for, let's say 30 minutes, I say, well, nope, now it's 10. Cut that in a third. You can only study for 10 minutes. No more, but also no less. And instead of like, let's learn all of the skills for all 5 languages, speaking, listening, reading, writing, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, I said, hey, just focus on 2, 3 skills, max 1 even for each of them. And surprise, surprise, what happened? I remembered more, I stressed less, I had more fun, I actually studied more consistently because I wasn't putting so much crazy pressure on myself to do the things that I was dreading, right? Doing less didn't actually erase any progress. I would say I actually made more progress because I wasn't doing busy work. I wasn't, repeating the same things that I didn't actually need to repeat. I was very strategic with my time. I said, well, if you only have 10 minutes, what can you do in these 10 minutes that's absolutely going to help you make progress? Do that. Don't do the other thing that you could have chosen that would fill in the space of 30 minutes, but is probably a little unnecessary. It's extra. You don't have to do that. Or you're doing it, but it's not actually tied to the goals that you're trying to achieve, the skills that you're trying to build. Like, just don't do that. And this is what made my language learning process sustainable. So that meant that even on the busy days, even on the days where I had low energy, not a lot of time, I was still able to maintain progress, maintain the skills, build the skills for the languages that I was focused on. And it was a really good reminder for me that fluency isn't really built by studying harder. So if anyone tells you that you're not a real language learner, you're not going to make progress if you're not studying for 6 hours every day, the only reason why you would need to study for even half that much is if you had a test happening in like 30 to 60, 90 days, let's say, and it was the only thing you were focused on for a short period of time. Like, I love a good sprint, a sprint study challenge, but it's a sprint. It's not a marathon. We're not doing that forever. We do that for a short period of time. And then we go back to the way that we want to study for a long term or practice, because at some point you stop formally studying and you just start learning through context and learning through living and experiencing the language. And so once I started protecting my progress, protecting my routine, and honoring where I was with my time and my energy, I actually started to enjoy it again. And I was so excited because I was like, language learning is my life. Like, literally, I've been learning languages since the 6th grade formally. And this is what I love to do. And I hated that I hated it, but I knew I had to claw myself out of it. And this is the process that helps me to do that. So for the longest time, even when you do a search online, like, what's a good language learner? What is a good way? What is the best way? Or you'll hear other people throwing judgments at each other about what is a good language learner or not. I think I saw recently someone was saying, like, stop, I'm going to butcher it, but essentially stop being lazy about your language studies. Just go get a tutor, go get a teacher. When like a tutor and a teacher is not required. What you need is native level content and exposure. And you can do that without a teacher, especially if there's a lot of resources available to you. You can do that with courses online. You can do that with your own self-made study course. You can do that with movies and TV shows. You can do that with podcasts and music. Like there's so many different ways to learn languages that it's easier to find a way that works for you. Now, obviously this depends on the language because some languages have a lot less resources. But that just means you have to get a little bit more creative and also redefine what does it mean to be good at learning languages. Because now good language learning to me is being consistent. And I know that consistency doesn't mean every day. Good language learning for me is learning languages without that guilt and that shame, without that unnecessary pressure. Good language learning for me is when I build in those breaks and I don't feel guilty about that either, where I have at minimum 2 days a week. I do it Monday through Friday. And most of the time it's the weekends where I say no language learning required on these days. It's a given in my schedule. Good is when I trust my brain. I trust that my brain remembers. I trust that I'm going to be able to use the language and adapt and figure it out because I've done it. I've built the evidence. I've built the case for being able to do that. And fluency doesn't really come from these high level, high effort, all or nothing days. It actually comes from a combination of things, including the low pressure days, the days where you do 10 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever your minimum is. That's progress. That's a good language learner, and that's consistent. So if you're waiting to get serious again, maybe that's your cue to focus on steady, on sustainable, on consistent routines instead. And that's just going to help you to make the progress you want to see. That's just going to help you to build your skills and finally use the languages that you're learning in your day-to-day life, because that's the goal. So this week, do less on purpose. Literally do less on purpose. See how it feels to leave a little bit of energy in the tank, right? Don't purposely try to use it all. Actually use a fraction of it for your language studies, just for 7 days at least. You don't need to earn, a check and a gold star. Do write down the wins that you're experiencing, the progress that you make. And again, if you haven't already, make sure to download my wins tracker if you don't have one for yourself. Write them down. You just need to keep going without the guilt and the shame and that frustration that we feel because our expectations are way too high. And if this episode hits home, I want you to share this with someone who also keeps raising the bar of their expectations. The moment things start to work, you're like, well, now I have to increase it. No, you don't. No, actually, you don't. Keep it sustainable, keep it personal and personalized, and just keep going, even if it's messy.